Meet Darren Daz Mitchell and Lisa O'Connor, two lives pulled in opposite directions by Liverpool's drug mafia. Daz, a rising gang leader hungry for power, and Lisa, a community worker fighting to save her neighborhood from destruction. Their stories collide in a city where loyalty means survival, and every choice could be a matter of life or death. Liverpool was a city known for its rich history, music, and bustling docks. Its streets had seen decades of change, but for a long time, the city remained peaceful. Underneath that calm surface, however, something was quietly growing, a dangerous underworld that few noticed at first. In the late 1990s, small groups of drug dealers began to organize themselves. What once was just local youths selling small amounts of drugs on street corners slowly started to change into a more serious and structured operation. These groups weren't just about selling anymore. They wanted control, power, and money. At first, the drug trade was hidden in the shadows, making it easy for many to ignore. People in the neighborhoods had no idea how deeply these new criminal networks were planting their roots. Drugs like cocaine, heroin, and crack began to flood into the city, supplied by people with connections stretching far beyond Liverpool's limits. The drugs brought in large amounts of cash, and with the money came greed and ambition. Small-time dealers began to join forces, forming alliances to protect their interests and expand their reach. As these alliances grew stronger, so did their willingness to use violence. What started as threats and fights soon turned into something far worse. Rival groups fought for control over neighborhoods, and the police were often caught off guard by how quickly things escalated. The once friendly streets were changing into dangerous battlegrounds. People who had lived their entire lives in these areas began to fear walking outside. Parents worried about their children, and many tried to keep their families away from the growing violence. Behind closed doors, the criminals operated like businesses. They made careful plans to move drugs across the country and protect their illegal profits. They bribed officials, intimidated witnesses, and used fear to keep the community silent. The city's dark underworld was no longer a secret. It was becoming a powerful force that threatened the very heart of Liverpool. But even as this shadowy world grew stronger, few could imagine the scale of the violence and chaos that was about to sweep through the city. The rise of the drug mafia was only just beginning. By the early 2000s, the small groups that once operated independently had merged into larger, more organized gangs. These gangs didn't just sell drugs, they controlled entire neighborhoods, moving drugs in and out of the city with precision and efficiency. This was the birth of what many would come to call Liverpool's drug mafia. Unlike simple street dealers, these mafias operated like businesses, with clear leadership, strict rules, and complex networks that stretched beyond the city's borders. The leaders of these groups were not just criminals. They were masterminds who understood how to exploit the system. They controlled supply routes, managed distribution, and made sure that their profits kept growing. With drug money flowing in, the mafias gained influence in many parts of Liverpool. They owned businesses, invested in properties, and even had connections with corrupt officials. Their wealth gave them power, and their power made them untouchable for a time. Violence became a tool for enforcing control and protecting territory. If anyone challenged their authority or tried to take over their drug routes, they responded quickly and brutally. Assassinations, shootings, and beatings became common in the city's streets. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire as the mafia fought rival gangs for dominance. The violence sent a clear message: Liverpool's underworld was no place for outsiders or those who dared to interfere. This new mafia culture also changed the way people lived in affected areas. Fear and mistrust grew among neighbors, and many avoided talking to the police. The drug mafias thrived on this silence. They bribed some law enforcement officers and threatened others, making it nearly impossible to break their hold on the city. The communities that once felt safe now felt trapped, stuck in the middle of a hidden war. Despite the growing chaos, the scale and sophistication of Liverpool's drug mafia caught many by surprise. It was no longer just about street-level dealing, It was a criminal empire with far-reaching consequences. What began as small, scattered groups had become a powerful force that would challenge law enforcement and change the city forever. The rise of the Mafia marked a dark turning point in Liverpool's history, one that would lead to years of violence and struggle. Tensions between rival drug gangs in Liverpool reached a breaking point in the mid-2000s. The competition for control over lucrative neighborhoods and drug routes became fierce, and what had once been mostly secretive clashes soon turned into open, violent confrontations. Turf wars exploded across the city, with shootings and attacks happening in broad daylight, shaking the confidence of residents and making the streets unsafe for everyone. These conflicts were not just between rival gangs but sometimes even involved former allies who turned against each other in a fight for power. The violence was shocking in its intensity and frequency. Innocent bystanders often became victims, caught in the crossfire or targeted by mistake. Everyday places like parks, shopping areas, and even schools became battlegrounds. The sound of gunfire became more common, and the city's emergency services were stretched thin, trying to respond to the rising number of attacks. People who had once felt safe in their neighborhoods began to live in constant fear, locking their doors earlier and avoiding the streets at night. The reasons behind the turf wars were clear. Control meant money and influence. Each gang wanted to dominate as much of the drug trade as possible. Losing a neighborhood meant losing millions in profits. This high-stakes environment pushed gangs to become more aggressive and ruthless. Violence wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning to anyone who thought of crossing them. The message was clear. These gangs would stop at nothing to protect their empire. Communities suffered deeply from the turf wars. Many families faced tragic losses, and children grew up surrounded by violence and fear. Local businesses closed down, unable to survive in such dangerous conditions. Schools saw more students dropping out or becoming involved with gangs themselves. The social fabric of entire neighborhoods began to unravel. Despite the fear, law enforcement struggled to keep up. The gangs were well armed and secretive, making arrests difficult. Each new act of violence only fueled more anger and retaliation. The turf wars marked the darkest period in Liverpool's ongoing battle with its drug mafias, one that left lasting scars on the city and its people. The rise of Liverpool's drug mafias deeply affected the city's communities, especially the most vulnerable. Many neighborhoods caught in the crossfire were already struggling with poverty, unemployment, and a lack of opportunities. For young people growing up in these areas, the drug gangs seemed like one of the few paths to survival, or even success. The mafias offered not just money but also a sense of belonging and protection that many found missing elsewhere. Recruitment became a major part of the gang's power. They targeted teenagers and young adults, often convincing them that joining the mafia was the only way to escape poverty or a difficult home life. Some were drawn in by the promise of fast money and status, while others felt trapped by their environment. Once involved, it was almost impossible to leave. The gangs controlled their members with threats, violence, and loyalty demands, creating a cycle that was hard to break. At the same time, drug addiction spread rapidly throughout these communities. The availability of heroin, crack cocaine, and other drugs increased, devastating families and fueling more crime. Addiction tore apart relationships and weakened the social structure of neighborhoods. Parents struggled to protect their children from the dangerous influence of drugs and gangs, but many felt powerless against the growing crisis. Schools and local services faced enormous challenges. Attendance dropped as children became involved in gangs or stayed home out of fear. Teachers and social workers worked tirelessly, but were often overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. The impact of the mafia's presence went beyond crime. It affected education, health, and the overall well-being of entire communities. At its worst, the drug mafia created an environment where fear and violence were part of daily life. People felt watched, silenced, and isolated. Trust within neighborhoods broke down as some residents became informants, while others lived in denial or despair. The gangs had built a shadow society, controlling not only drugs and money, but the very lives of those around them. Despite this bleak picture, small signs of hope began to emerge. Community groups, charities, and some brave individuals started working to challenge the mafia's grip. But the damage was deep, and the struggle to reclaim Liverpool's neighborhoods was just beginning. The violence and fear gripping Liverpool reached a terrifying peak with a series of shocking incidents that captured national attention. One of the most devastating moments was the assassination of a well-known community leader who had dedicated his life to fighting the gangs and helping young people stay away from drugs. His death sent shockwaves through the city, revealing just how far the drug mafia was willing to go to protect their empire. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a calculated message to anyone who dared to stand against them. Investigations into the killing uncovered a tangled web of betrayal and hidden alliances. It became clear that the mafia's influence ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Some local officials and law enforcement officers were suspected of turning and shifting their drug routes to avoid detection. This cat-and-mouse game between police and criminals made it clear that fighting the drug trade was a complex and ongoing battle. Arrests alone could not solve the problem without broader support from the community and changes to the social conditions that allowed the gangs to grow. The public's frustration grew as violence continued, and many wondered if peace in Liverpool was even possible. For the police, the struggle was exhausting and dangerous. The mafia's deep roots in the city meant that every step forward came with setbacks. Still, law enforcement remained determined, knowing that without their efforts, the city's darkest days would only continue. The fight against Liverpool's drug mafias was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Just when it seemed that Liverpool's drug mafias had the city firmly under their control, an unexpected twist changed the course of the battle against them. A high-ranking member of one of the most feared gangs made a shocking decision to turn informant. This individual, deeply involved in the mafia's operations, chose to risk everything by sharing critical inside information with law enforcement. His decision sent shockwaves through both the criminal world and the city's authorities. This informant's knowledge was unlike anything police had seen before. He revealed detailed plans about drug shipments, names of key players and locations of secret meetings. His testimony exposed the mafia's hidden methods for smuggling drugs, laundering money, and silencing witnesses. Suddenly, the police had a clearer picture of the mafia's inner workings, and they could finally begin to dismantle the complex network that had seemed untouchable. The revelation caused panic within the drug mafias. Trust, which had been one of their strongest assets, began to crumble. Leaders grew suspicious of their closest allies, fearing betrayal at any moment. This internal fear weakened the gang's unity and made them vulnerable to police operations. It also led to violent reprisals, as mafias tried to root out any other potential informants within their ranks. Law enforcement quickly launched a series of coordinated raids across the city, targeting the mafia's strongest locations. The arrests dealt a heavy blow to the gangs, seizing drugs, weapons, and large sums of money. These actions disrupted the flow of drugs and slowed down the violence temporarily. For many in Liverpool, it was a hopeful sign that change was possible. However, the informant's decision came at a great personal cost. He had to enter witness protection, leaving behind his old life and living under constant threat. His courage was a rare beacon of hope in a dark time, proving that even from within the heart of the mafia, change could begin. This unexpected turn of events marked a new chapter in Liverpool's fight against its drug mafias. It showed that the power of one person's choice could challenge even the most dangerous criminal empires. Yet, it also revealed just how fragile peace remained in the city. The police raids and arrests, triggered by the informant's information, brought a momentary sense of relief to Liverpool. For a short time, the streets grew quieter, and the drug trade seemed to slow. However, this disruption also set off a chain reaction that made the situation even more complicated. The powerful drug mafias, weakened but not destroyed, fractured into smaller gangs competing to fill the gaps left behind. These new groups fought fiercely for control, sparking fresh waves of violence across the city. This splintering of the criminal underworld meant that the turf wars, which had once been between a few large groups, now involved numerous smaller factions. Each of these gangs was desperate to prove itself, leading to unpredictable and often more brutal conflicts. The violence spread beyond Liverpool's traditional hotspots, creeping into neighboring neighborhoods and even nearby cities. What had once been a local problem now became a regional crisis. The shifting drug routes and gang alliances also created new challenges for law enforcement. The mafias became more secretive and mobile, constantly changing locations and methods to avoid capture. They exploited weaknesses in the system, using technology and hidden networks to continue their illegal activities. This adaptability made it clear that breaking the cycle of crime would require more than just arrests. It demanded a long-term strategy. At the same time, the social damage caused by years of drug trafficking and violence became impossible to ignore. Communities struggled to recover from the trauma, with many families still dealing with loss, addiction, and fear. The economic impact was also significant, as businesses closed and investment dried up in the hardest-hit areas. The city faced the difficult task of rebuilding not just law and order, but also trust and hope among its residents. The ripple effect of Liverpool's drug mafia crisis highlighted the complexity of tackling organized crime. It was no longer just a local issue, but a problem affecting many parts of the UK. The struggle to restore peace was ongoing, with successes tempered by new challenges. Liverpool's story became a powerful reminder that the fight against drug mafias was far from over, and that lasting change would require patience, courage, and cooperation from all sides. As violence and crime continued to plague Liverpool, a powerful movement began to rise from within the city's own communities. Local leaders, charities, and everyday residents refused to accept that their neighborhoods were lost to the drug mafias. They came together with a shared goal to fight back and reclaim their streets from the grip of violence and fear. This grassroots effort became a beacon of hope amid years of darkness. Community groups started organizing neighborhood watches, youth clubs, and outreach programs aimed at steering young people away from gangs. They worked tirelessly to create safe spaces where children and teenagers could learn new skills, find mentors, and build a future beyond crime. Many of these initiatives focused on education, job training, and counseling, offering alternatives to the drug trade that had trapped so many in a cycle of poverty and violence. Churches, schools, and local businesses played important roles too. They provided support networks for families affected by addiction and violence, helping them access services and rebuild their lives. Together, these efforts created a sense of unity and purpose that had long been missing from the hardest-hit areas. At the same time, residents began to speak out more openly against the gangs. Fear was still present, but courage grew stronger. People shared information with the police and refused to stay silent in the face of intimidation. This shift made it harder for the mafias to operate with impunity. Slowly but surely, the hold of the drug gangs on some neighborhoods began to loosen. Despite these positive changes, the road to recovery was far from easy. The damage caused by years of drug trafficking and violence left deep scars, and progress was often slow and fragile. Some gangs continued to resist, and many young people still faced limited choices, but the spirit of the community effort gave Liverpool a fighting chance. This chapter in Liverpool's story showed the power of people working together to overcome adversity. It was a reminder that change doesn't come from arrests alone. It comes from hope, resilience, and the determination of a city unwilling to give up. The battle for Liverpool's future was ongoing, but for the first time in years there was real reason to believe peace could return. Liverpool today stands at a delicate crossroads. The drug mafias that once ruled the city with violence and fear have been weakened, but they have not disappeared. Instead, they have changed, adapting to new challenges and shifting their operations to avoid detection. This means the threat still lingers in the shadows, reminding everyone that the battle against organized crime is far from over. Law enforcement remains vigilant, constantly working to identify and dismantle criminal networks before they can regain full control. Police forces use new technology, intelligence sharing, and community partnerships to stay one step ahead. While major arrests and raids continue, Officers know that breaking the cycle requires more than just locking up gang members. It demands addressing the root causes that allow these mafias to thrive in the first place. Communities across Liverpool are slowly healing. The efforts of local organizations, schools and families to provide education, support and opportunity have begun to make a difference. Young people now have more options and hope for a future beyond the dangers of gang life. This progress, however, is fragile and must be protected. Economic struggles, social inequalities and pockets of poverty still make certain areas vulnerable to criminal influence. The city's story serves as a powerful warning and lesson. It shows how quickly crime can take hold when communities are left without support, and how difficult it is to restore peace once violence becomes entrenched. Yet it also reveals the strength and resilience of people who refuse to be defined by fear or violence. Liverpool's dark underworld may never fully disappear, but its grip can be weakened by unity, vigilance, and hope. The fight against drug mafias is ongoing, requiring constant effort from law enforcement, communities, and government alike. The city's future depends on a collective commitment to protect its neighborhoods and provide opportunities for all residents. The story of Liverpool's rise and struggle with its drug mafias is a reminder that beneath the surface of any city, darkness can grow, but with courage and determination, light can return. The journey toward lasting peace continues, fragile.